For 44 years, I lived a life of absolute wonder, in the sense that I was born an able-bodied person, and I lived a life where I was sporting, I was out there, and I grew as an individual, and I literally worked my way up to a senior management position without any problems. I spent 6 days a week in the gym, and I concentrated on my exterior, especially in my last few years, from about 39, 40, after being basically weighed in at 159 kilograms, I decided to change my life in my second marriage, basically. And I spent a lot of time in the gym, and I became an arrogant, to put it bluntly, asshole, because of the simple fact that I was concentrating on the exterior. I bought a bike. I had a 1300 Blackbird. I was cruising at 280 kilometers an hour. I really took life as, I don't even know the right word. Vanzelfsprekend is the Afrikaans say? For granted. I took life for granted. And yeah, I had a few little hiccups in my life, like anybody did. And you know, every time, even in the past, I mean, I lost my son at the age of 7. He was 7 years old when he died, and I managed to pick myself up. And I always had this whole thing about, you know, we move on. And then all of a sudden, and I have to say this as well, you know, I spent my life looking down at people with disabilities because of the simple fact that I was able-bodied. I played sport. I did what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it, and I never thought beyond the now. And all of a sudden, in the blink of an eye, literally 300th of a second, everything changed. And I still get cold shivers when I think about it, because on the 1st of April 2008, I was involved in a car accident, coming home from work on a day which was supposed to be the best day of my life. I was offered a position as a CEO of a major company, and they actually said to me, go home, work out your package yourself, as long as it's not 6 figures. And they made a joke about it. And obviously I was traveling home that night, and I was following another vehicle, and it was dusk, and it was an accident. It literally, I watched how the car rolled 3 times. I lay next to the road for a few seconds, upside down in the car. As I said, I heard this crunching metal during the accident, and I started crawling out. I undid my safety belt until I got to about my mid-waist, and I found I couldn't move anymore. And it was almost in an instant, there were people there, and I was actually quite glad at first, because obviously I knew it was out in the bush, and I was about 45 kilometers from Alberton at the time. And I lay there and I felt fine. I literally felt fine, until some woman went and opened her mouth and said, oh my God, look at his arm. And then I realized that something had gone wrong. And I didn't know what it was at the time. And I lifted my left hand. I could see my left hand. I could move my neck. And when I felt for my right arm, it wasn't there. And I realized that I was actually lying on top of it. It had been bent back over behind my back, literally facing the same way as my left arm. And then I started panicking. And the funny thing is that I was completely aware of what was happening. And as I said earlier, that I was a biker. I had earrings, I had watches, I had chains, I had all this sort of stuff. And the very first thing I actually said to the woman was, please can you take, because I knew, the minute I knew that my arm was damaged, I knew this was going to be surgery, and I knew I was going to hospital. So I asked them to remove the chains and my earrings and everything like that. And I even remember giving them the telephone number for my next of kin. At that stage I was living with a woman. And then I lay there, and there was no medical help. And I heard somebody talking on the telephone that explaining to the ambulance where we were, and the ambulance was lost. I don't think I can actually explain how terrified I was at that stage, because I thought I was going to die. And I know I needed medical assistance immediately, and you keep on hearing about this, the golden hour, and and this starts going through your mind. And there's people there, nobody can help you. And eventually, after an hour and 15 minutes, I think it was, the ambulance arrived there. And looking at it from a humorous point of view, the first thing they did is they tried to put a neck brace on me. And anybody that knows me will tell you, don't come near my face for anything, because I feel claustrophobic. And I remember telling the medic at that stage of the game, and I actually shook my head and I said, just leave my head alone. My neck isn't the problem, it's my arm. Help me with my arm. And to cut a long story short, they assisted me, they stabilized me on the road, and it took us another 30 minutes to get back to hospital. And all this time I was literally conscious of what was going on. And I know but it was a whole bunch of years ago, and the medic actually allowed me to keep my head out of the brace until such time as we arrived at the hospital. By this stage, they weren't allowed to give me a lot of medication, still not knowing what the extent of my injuries were, until the doctor actually gave me a huge amount of morphine to put me out. And at that stage, there was literally no transition from being conscious to unconscious. And what happened after that was probably the most horrific thing I can imagine happening to anybody. I knew my medical aid had given up. And my medical aid had been depleted, and I could actually hear the doctors and the nurses talking about it while I was in a coma. And obviously I didn't know I was in a coma. And during that time, I actually dreamt, heard, imagined. I don't know what is reality and what isn't, because it was all a reality to me. I actually saw myself in the morgue no less than 3 times. I actually knew that the nurses I knew their vocations outside. I knew who wanted to be a nurse, who didn't want to be a nurse. I knew one of them was a boxer. How I know this it could only be because I knew what was going on around me. But I didn't know I wasn't awake. And this whole time, I don't think I can explain how scared I was, and the trauma that was going through my mind because of the horrific things I was witnessing, and to me they were reality. And the very last thing I remember at that stage, before actually waking up, because I could tell you a ton of things. I mean, that's for another video, the whole 30 days in a coma. But I woke up to see my family standing at my feet, the doctor standing there. And I remember I had a trachea, which they just probably recently removed. So my voice wasn't very good. And the first things I said is that was the worst night's sleep I've ever had in my life. And my sister said to me, "But you've been gone for 30 days. It was difficult. I didn't realize exactly what had happened to me. And then all of a sudden, the reality hit home. I no longer had the use of my right arm. And for a long time, I actually wish I had died. And the doctors told me that I wasn't supposed to be there. Sorry. My chest injuries alone should have taken my life. They'd actually, during my coma period, had to make a decision as to whether they were going to remove my arm or not. And it's strange what they say, that sometimes your family doesn't know you as well as they think they do. And there was an argument between my son and my sister regarding whether my arm should be kept or not. And thankfully they decided to keep it. There's a fight or flight circumstance where you've got to decide whether you're going to carry on fighting or whether you're going to give up. And I can only attribute the decision that I made to get up to my upbringing, because once I'd come to terms with the fact that, and I know my wife is going to get very upset with me if I say this, but because I often say it is what it is. I made a decision to accept the fact that I'm living. I no longer look like the way I used to. And I think the very first thing that I realized is that I'd actually lived my life. And I don't know whether I can say this the way that I'm going to, but I'm going to call a spade a spade. I actually lived my life as an arsehole. And I took everything for granted. And I never considered, and I think this is the thing that I'd like to get across very, very pertinently, is that able-bodied people look down on other people, and yet the change could happen in an instant. You could go from being able-bodied to disabled within a matter of a split second. I basically made a conscious decision that no matter what happened, I wasn't going to let myself become a dependent on the state pension, because nobody can live on that pension. With the result is I had to stand up and I had to do something for myself. And here I was, simply the same person, but now with the lack of the use of a right arm. And I put out 600 CVs. I lost my house a year and a half after the accident. Despite trying everything, I had no income. I lost my position because I was in hospital for so long they couldn't keep my position for me. Mentally, I wasn't right to go back to work because I was constantly fighting pain. I think my arm, I was literally drinking drugs to the point of being a zombie most of the time just to get rid of the pain. I had stomach problems because of the amount of medicine that I'd taken. I literally developed a stomach problem. I then started off with an independent dealership, motorcar dealership, and I decided I want to start helping people go through the similar instances and overcoming their, because I believed I was taking it quite well. I'd got up, I started doing things, and I started doing public speaking, and I'd registered myself as a public speaker. And all I wanted to do from the time that I'd accepted the fact that I was now disabled was to help other people. Because I realized how I was before the time towards people with disabilities, and how we keep on talking in South Africa about the previously disadvantaged. But I realized through my accident that even today, people living with disabilities are the currently disadvantaged. I knew I was in a good mental space. It was just a question of getting myself back and figuring out how to use my physical disability, and you know, you've got to take into consideration, as I said, talking to an able-bodied audience. If I asked you now to go to the wall, take a hammer and hammer a nail into the wall, you'd be able to do it no problem. And I was able to do that for 44 years. And all of a sudden, now I can't even do that. The mental strain on what you could and can't do anymore probably worked on me much harder than anything else, because, and this is one of the things I said to people, and I still say it to people today, sometimes that old saying is, you don't know what you have until you've lost it. We don't take it serious enough. And being an able-bodied person for 44 years, being able to do sport, being able to drive a car, being able to work, get a job, and nobody judged you for it. And simply because you now have to put by law on an application form that you are disabled, and bearing in mind we live in a country which actually says you are benefited because of the fact that you are disabled. Everyone said to me, the doctor said to me, I'd never be able to find a job again, and I wanted to prove them wrong. And unfortunately, I couldn't at that stage. Because, as I said, I put out 600 CVs. I got one reply. I ended up having to go in a taxi from Cozy Bay to Kokstad. And it was during the World Cup soccer, and I ended up staying at a taxi driver's house that night because I didn't have money. As I said to you, I lost everything. And through a friend, we ended up in Cozy Bay. And taking full advantage of the simple fact that I wasn't able to get a job, he exploited me to the point where I was working for him for 6 months without getting paid. And he knew I couldn't get out of there. I didn't have money. So despite that, I told my wife, which I'd imported from the UK a year prior to this, that I couldn't work like this. We couldn't live like it. And we ended up living in the bush basically for almost 2 years with no income. I started training some of the youngsters in soccer. And I kept my mind busy for that period because of the simple fact that otherwise I'd go crazy. And it was called the Manguzi Rama soccer team, and I put all my efforts into them, and we actually changed their name, funny enough, to the Manguzi Super Eagles, because I managed to get them a full set of kits which looks like the Nigerian Super Eagles. And I started writing an article to the newspapers of the area on a weekly basis about what we were doing, and I realized that here we were in the middle of nowhere with people that were so passionate about life, and every day they practiced their sport. And I literally went into this mode of, you know what, this is maybe why I'm here today. Maybe this is my calling. This is my reason for living, was to help other people. And that is where this whole passion started. And I actually took a deep sea diving course. I started doing scuba diving. I had to teach myself how to use a camera with one hand, and bearing in mind I've only got the use of my left hand, and the shutter on a camera sits on the right hand side, and I can only thank my lucky stars I've got pretty big hands. I think my self-confidence actually became a lot more prominent when I realized that I could actually take decent photographs with the one hand. And I started publishing it on social media, and I started getting rave reviews, and people were, and I actually did a little stint of doing wedding photography just to boost my confidence. And then I decided to go and do underwater photography, bearing in mind that underwater you need your arms, and I've only got one, and that one was now holding a camera. Yeah, it was a bit of a challenge, but as they say, you learn to adapt, and you do that at the speed of lightning. I've adopted a saying over the last few years that change only occurs when the need for change exceeds the want for change. And having only the one arm, I needed to change my life very quickly. And through a lot of anxiety and trials and tribulations, I ended up in Mossel Bay in about 2012, I think it was, and back in civilization. And that's where I really started to flourish, because I was back in a situation where I could actually control my destiny, if I may, because of the fact that it was a city, it was a a place where I felt more at home. And I managed to get myself a position on Eden FM for a few months as a second anchor on the afternoon show, and I enjoyed that thoroughly. But while I was in Mossel Bay, I started working with the Protective Workshop for people with disabilities. And I realized the amount of work that needed to be done, not only as a volunteer, but I needed to do something to make a difference in people's lives. And this is the thing, people seem to think that your brain sits in your arm or in your disability, and that they try and abuse you for the simple fact that they think you're a soft target and you need the position. And I've learned literally I need nothing but my own cognizance and my own thoughts, and I am the only person that can change my future. I'm the only person that can change my circumstances. And we moved to George, and I decided to go into politics. I didn't know whether I was going to be accepted into politics, but I thought, well, this is a good way of actually doing something for people, because I could be a policy maker. I could do things to change not only one or two people's lives at a time, but if I embraced the public servant aspect of being in politics, I could make a genuine difference. And within 2 years, I stood as a councillor for one of the wards in George South, and I was elected as the ward councillor. Now, a lot of people say, yes, it all depends on the party you belong to, and yes, I'm very grateful for the party, but there also needs a certain amount of personal dedication. There's you can wear any T-shirt, but your heart has to speak for what the situation is. And I'm grateful for the opportunity. And within the first 2 years of being a councillor, I was actually promoted to a mayoral committee member for community and social development, which actually deals with exactly what I wanted to do. And somebody had seen my passion for people with disabilities, and I could live my dream, and I did. And the end of my first term, I applied to become the councillor again, and I also applied to become the speaker. And I had to have enough faith in myself, bearing in mind, and I need to take you back 16 years to after the accident. When I opened my eyes, I didn't realize the immense impact that 30 days in a coma had on me. Once again, having this vision of myself with a six-pack, with biceps the size of, and we were actually making jokes before my accident that I looked a lot like Dolph Lundgren. And I didn't see myself, and I didn't realize the transformation that I'd had in 30 days until I was wheeled down in a wheelchair to have a CAT scan. And they pushed me into an elevator with mirrors. And I didn't know who was in the mirror. There was a person sitting looking at me with no hair, my hair had been shaved off. I have false teeth, and my false teeth, because I'd lost 58 kilograms in a matter of 38 days, were too big for me. I didn't have an arm which was working, and I didn't know the person in the mirror, and that scared me. And here I was a few years later, and I was on the verge of becoming the Speaker of George, and I was accepted. And I look back at it and I think to myself, you know what? I can only thank my parents, my upbringing, and the discipline that I was brought up with to never give up. And I think the message that I want to give is, as long as you've got two hands, two legs and feet, and a mind that can think, I'm never going to have sympathy for you if you don't use it. Because I'm telling you now, no matter how bad your life is, you haven't hit rock bottom. And you determine, you decide, nobody else, you decide how much you're willing to take. And if you don't pitch up, you are the loser. Now, the reason why I'm saying this is because people say that you have no choice. I could have become a drug addict because of the pain. I could have done so many other things. I could have gone and laid down and become an indigent state patient and accepted 2,500 rand or whatever the case may be. But I didn't. I cannot and I will never accept the fact that and in fact, I'm going to put this quite categorically, I have never begged for a cent in my life. And I refuse to beg, because by begging, I am enslaving myself and becoming dependent on other people. You are all born with a talent. I learned that the hard way. When I started doing the photography and the social media marketing, and I was in the joint venture, I was too scared, and I think this is the message that you need to understand today. Stop being scared. Embrace who you are. You have talents. I sat literally on the edge of going backwards once again because I was too scared. I had a joint ventureship which was falling flat. And I made a decision that no matter what happens, I will never put my wife and myself through that again, where we have nothing. And I'm saying this to you today. Stop making excuses. Stop looking for the easy way out. Because if you have an able body and an able mind, you can use your talents to create an income. Don't be scared if it means sweeping the streets. Don't be scared if you're offered an opportunity to wash a car. Because if you don't want to do that, you don't want an income. I've literally sold black plastic bags. I have done whatever I can. I'm turning 60 this year. I've just started running. Why? Because I can. Because I need to prove to myself, not to you, not to anybody else, I need to prove to myself that I am differently abled, not disabled. No matter what challenges life throws at me, I'm not in the position I am now because I have to be. I'm in the position I am now because I want to be. I could walk out of here tomorrow, but I'd be failing my mission to make a difference in other people's lives. And on top of all this, and I'm going to end with this, today, despite everything and having the one arm, and as I was saying earlier, if you think you're at rock bottom, okay, you're going to be the first to know this outside in the media. Today I was diagnosed with skin cancer. I could see that as a negative, or I could see that as a positive. But you know what? It's going to make one difference in my life, because it has reiterated the fact that life is today. Life is now. Because tomorrow is not guaranteed. Nothing is guaranteed. But if you don't live your life now, and if you take everything for granted, and I'm going to tell you straight, get off your backside. Go and do something to make your life better. I can't do it for you. There is no such thing as a motivational speaker. I can inspire you, I can talk to you, and I can have sympathy, or not, I don't have sympathy with anybody, I'm sorry, because of the simple fact that sympathy gets you nowhere. Sympathy makes you a slave to your circumstances. That's my opinion. But I can have empathy. I know, certainly through my experiences, what you're experiencing. So I can understand to a degree, but nobody experiences. We can have exactly the same accident, we can have exactly the same situation, but you're going to experience it differently to what I am. But the difference between myself and those sitting at home on a SASSA grant, on whatever, is a mindset. Your mind, your attitude is going to make the difference. Get off your butt and do the difference.